They took over an entire city. 16,000 vehicles in one coordinated push. And almost nobody outside China noticed. No headlines, no massive press conference, no viral announcement, just silence. Because these vehicles were electric buses. And this quiet takeover tells you something very important about how BYD became one of the biggest names in the electric vehicle industry. This is Mr. Autoplug. Today, we're not talking about flashy SUVs or futuristic concept cars. We're talking about the playbook BYD used to quietly conquer the transportation industry, starting with the most boring vehicle imaginable, the city bus. December 27th, 2017. 2 days after Christmas, Shenzhen, a city of roughly 12 million people, completed the conversion of its entire public bus fleet to electric. More than 16,000 buses, every single one. This wasn't a pilot program. It wasn't a handful of experimental routes. The entire fleet went electric, and people actually started complaining about it. Not because of pollution, not because of traffic, because they couldn't hear the buses coming anymore. An entire transportation system had practically disappeared from the city's soundscape. And that was the point, because BYD had discovered something the traditional auto industry largely ignored. The bus was the perfect vehicle to electrify. Think about it. A private car needs enough range for unpredictable trips. A city bus doesn't. It runs the same routes every day. Same stops, same distance, same depot, same schedule. You don't need a massive battery designed for a road trip that might happen once a year. You need a battery designed for the exact route the vehicle drives every day. And buses have another advantage. They already have somewhere to charge. A depot, a fenced parking lot with electricity. So instead of building millions of public chargers for individual drivers, a city could concentrate its charging infrastructure in one controlled location. Then there's maintenance. A diesel bus spends its life stopping and starting in traffic. That means fuel consumption, engine wear, brakes, and constant maintenance. Electric buses eliminate many of those moving parts. No engine oil, no turbo, no exhaust system, and regenerative braking dramatically reduces brake wear. For a transit authority, that's not just an environmental benefit. It's a spreadsheet benefit. And that brings us to the most important part. The buyer wasn't an individual consumer. It was a government. Nobody has emotional brand loyalty to a city bus. There isn't a bus influencer telling you which model you absolutely need. A transit authority doesn't ask which bus looks cooler. It asks, what's the purchase price? What's the operating cost? How reliable is it? And how much will this thing cost over 10 or 12 years? BYD built its strategy around exactly those questions. And this didn't happen overnight. The story really begins in 2009. Shenzhen was one of 13 Chinese cities selected to experiment with what the government called new energy vehicles. And Shenzhen happened to be home to BYD. At the time, BYD wasn't the global automotive giant people know today. It had started as a battery company. Cars came later, and BYD made a controversial decision that would eventually become one of its biggest advantages. It focused heavily on lithium iron phosphate batteries. Compared with some competing battery chemistries, these batteries offered less energy density. For a passenger car, that could be a serious disadvantage. But for a bus, the equation changed. A bus is enormous. Weight is less of a concern. There is plenty of physical space for batteries. And what you gain is extremely valuable for fleet operators. Long cycle life, lower battery costs, and strong thermal stability. So while other automakers were obsessing over maximum range, BYD was focusing on something fleet operators actually cared about: cost per kilometer over the entire life of the vehicle. From 2009 to 2011, Shenzhen experimented. From 2012 to 2015, the city ran smaller pilots. There were failures, there were problems, there were things that had to be fixed. But those failures created something incredibly valuable: data. BYD learned what happened to batteries after years of real-world operation. It learned how drivers used regenerative braking. It learned how charging infrastructure behaved. It learned how to organize depots. It learned what actually broke. And by 2016 and 2017, Shenzhen was ready to make the massive transition. BYD ended up supplying the majority of the fleet. And suddenly, the company had something competitors couldn't simply buy: experience. 8 years of it. That experience became the foundation for BYD's international expansion. One of the clearest examples was Bogota, Colombia. BYD had already established a foothold in Colombia with electric taxis. Then came the buses. In 2019, Bogota opened a tender for hundreds of electric buses, and BYD won the majority. The important part? This wasn't simply a government ordering electric buses because they were electric. The tender allowed different technologies to compete: diesel, gas, electric, and electric one. BYD then took another clever approach. Instead of simply shipping complete buses into Colombia, it worked with local manufacturers to build the bodies locally. Local labor, local manufacturing, local jobs. That made the political argument much easier. And then came the infrastructure, the depot, because that's where BYD's real advantage becomes obvious. A bus isn't just a bus. Behind every electric fleet is a charging system, power infrastructure, software, maintenance, training, spare parts, battery support. Once a city builds all of that around a particular system, switching suppliers becomes much harder. The first bus is a sale. The depot is a long-term relationship. And this is the part that most people miss when they look at BYD's rise. The company wasn't simply selling vehicles. It was building an ecosystem around those vehicles. And eventually, that ecosystem spread beyond China. BYD entered cities across Latin America. It expanded into Europe. It supplied electric buses in the United Kingdom. Its electric chassis even ended up underneath double-decker buses in London. And by then, BYD had become something much bigger than a Chinese bus manufacturer. It had become proof that electric public transportation could work at enormous scale. Of course, there are legitimate criticisms. China's electric vehicle industry benefited from significant government support. BYD has also faced questions about reliability, spare parts, and fleet performance in some markets. And national security concerns led the United States to restrict certain Chinese-built buses from benefiting from federal transit funding. So this isn't a story about a company that won every battle. It's a story about a company that entered a category almost nobody was paying attention to and used it as a training ground. While everyone else was watching the showroom, BYD was watching the depot. While competitors were selling cars, BYD was learning how cities actually operate electric fleets. And while the world was debating whether electric vehicles were practical, BYD was quietly collecting years of real-world data. That's the bigger lesson. Look at China's biggest industrial successes: solar panels, batteries, shipbuilding, rail, port equipment, and now electric buses. The pattern is remarkably similar. The biggest opportunities aren't always glamorous. Sometimes they're hidden inside industries people don't care about. And by the time everyone notices, the company that entered first has already spent a decade learning the business. That's what happened with BYD. The world discovered the company through electric cars. But the real story started much earlier. It started with buses, 16,000 of them, in one city, on one quiet day after Christmas. Everyone was watching the showroom. The takeover happened in the depot. This has been Mr. Autoplug. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Should Western governments have blocked BYD earlier, or was it already too late once cities like Shenzhen and Bogota proved the model could work? I'll see you in the next one.